Hey guys, this is RuRoniK95 here, and once again, it is time for a manga review video. Today's manga review, we're going to be reviewing Inuyasha Volume 9 for today's manga review. It's this one here. So, the story thus far of how we're going to take part left off on where we have on Volume 8 yesterday. Let's do this. Scroll 1. The Fruits of Evil. So this story basically how it takes place of how it's left off when Kagome is still figuring out about who's on the roll on the perfect score on her exam in her school, particularly of how she figured if it's for real or if it's, but technically it was a dream. She thought it could have been true. Meanwhile, Shippo, Moroku, and Inuyasha are sleeping. If they have, he realized that he found out that he knew that Kagome must have go back to the realm of how if there's something going on, particularly, with all the commotion like this happening, right? And for the thing is that Moroku saying that if there could be worth so much trouble, if they could enjoy self, if they could stay there forever, basically. Yeah, Inuyasha thought Kagome liked the exams, but she never liked the exams to begin with, particularly, until they noticed something of a head with hair on the road, basically, of how Moroku has notices something about the battle upstream, of how he could figure out about these heads, of how if they're truly human, of their marks, there's no marks and cuts, of how if it's hard to believe of any human sense of how they could notice, so they had to go in to investigate of how something going on, particularly. Meanwhile, from above, somebody who wanted to run, basically, of how if there was something ungodly, because the thing was no ancient master, particularly. It was the disciple, particularly, from out of nowhere, of how this goes. And it eats the human, basically, of how who is coming from above as well. When the heavy fog comes, Inuyasha, Shippo, Kagome, and Moroku are on the areas of how they could hear voices coming from the tree, basically, of how there were heads all over the trees, basically, of how they were devoured, of how was something happening, of what they noticed, of how, particularly of how they were suffered of, particularly of what they wanted to call, until they noticed a bone, something coming down from above as well. Inuyasha notices of how sounds like a demon to him, basically, if they could have figured out, so if how the sunset would have done nothing wrong, of the cycle of how they noticed. And this person in the temple was always eating, figured out if he has never gotten a single bite of a fruit, then might end up get heartburn until Inuyasha arrived, of how he could kill the Peach Man himself. Scroll 2, The Secret Garden. This explains of how there was devouring on the master's student as well. Inuyasha has used the Tetsaiga to kill off this bloke as well. But till nothing goes right, of how the flesh is repelled, of how these that look like flowers coming out from above. Carefully, basically, what you can notice as well. And for the thing of how this goes is that Inuyasha noticed something that looked like flowers until the hand comes out. Yeah, because he knew that Inuyasha was shrunk and it's into a smaller size, and it swallowed him up. Meanwhile, at this time, of course, Kagome, Moroku, and Shippo could figure out something about how this might have been the scariest night, as how they wanted to know something, until if they could realize if Inuyasha was up to something to fight off the Peach Man, until he noticed his lair of how the origins of a human, basically, there were these victims that are always noticed until they were teleported to the miniature garden where everyone is there. Is basically of how they've been teleported. And now the Peach Man finds out that he has found the Sheik shard as well. But till Inuyasha could figure out if he can get out of the guts of the Peach Man. Because he was inside the gut of the Peach Man, basically. Inuyasha wants to fight out in half-demon form until something of how his claws disappeared, which made Inuyasha become a human in this one. Yeah, in that chapter right here. Scroll 3. Stomach trouble. When Inuyasha's in his human form, he could figure out of something what's going on, basically, of how starting to feel the pain, basically, of how what he could fight off the Peach Man, basically, with his Tetsaiga, if he could have done this. But he's still inside the gut of the Peach Man himself, and now his clothes are dissolving. If something could have killed him inside, but he is calling it to the blade as well. But his sword was not even there until something has gotten the Tetsaiga. Must have stabbed through the gut, the Peach Man's gut, particularly, of how Inuyasha could figure out until the Peach Man coughs up and vomits out Inuyasha from the gut, and Inuyasha has to fight off the Peach Man with it in his human form. But if he could have gotten a chance as well, particularly, until Peach Man has slammed him down. He thought that if he was the demon that he swallowed, but then he was imprisoned into these, like, something that looked like those thorns that imprison him. Yeah, especially what you noticed in that one. If Inuyasha could fight off the Peach Man in his defeat, if he knew if Kagome were here, if they were nearby, but she was still in a miniature garden along with Shippo and Moroku that are in that garden-like village, particularly, until they could figure out if they die of thirst or starvation, until they heard something going on in the sky, until they noticed something from out of nowhere about the grab. Scroll 4, the Night Kitchen. When they figured out about how Inuyasha could fight off something of how he doesn't want a human body of himself, basically, but the Peach Man has got one of the villagers in that garden instead, but instead it's along with Kagome also as well, because she realized the Peach Man is a man-eating monster, particularly of how this would have gotten to them. Yeah, especially of how something going on. She realized if the Peach Man got Inuyasha, especially of how particularly as well, and then Inuyasha has lost too much blood when his eyes are starting to blur, but Inuyasha were still alive. And now Kagome's school uniform has there, except Kagome is inside the body after the Peach Man has devoured her as well, particularly with a tragic expression on what Inuyasha has, particularly, especially for the immortals, because this made Inuyasha vow revenge against the Peach Man, particularly when Moroku could have used the something of how to fight off those thorn prisons, one with the scar tunnel from the palm of his hand, basically, of what Moroku could have done. So Inuyasha has finally freed as well, especially of how something of how there was the monster's gut was inside out, what Inuyasha realized, and he saw Shippo and Moroku if they are there. By this time, of course, Kagome was in that smell of sake, like, bath as well, because they might have captured her as well. So she's end up, like, imprisonment, as how this particularly, when Inuyasha wants to rescue Kagome, of how basically from above that he knew that he was that, but he found out that Kagome was still alive because he has so many scratches from the wounds as well. There was so many blood in him, all over him. Scroll 5, the Peach Man's Nectar. So this explains basically of how Inuyasha could figure out something. If he could fight off against the Peach Man particularly, but he was badly wounded, which is not in a good way. So Kagome could figure out of how, if it's almost morning yet, but it was actually pitch black at night, particularly of how he could have figured out something, which almost had a lot to do for this thing, as how one way or the other, of how there was the hurt. This old person was the real hermit master. Yeah, because the mentor to the Peach Man, particularly, he could realize that the Peach Man is not a demon, which he was merely another mortal man, until Peach Man arrives, of how something basically like a stone heart. Inuyasha realized that this thing used to be human, with evil within him has basically gotten much more stronger, of how the Peach Man has gotten to him. When Inuyasha wants to rescue Kagome, but he was all badly injured from the hurts as well. Especially how all these years with these little spells, of how the old guy's scrolls as well, particularly of how the youth and longevity as well. If Kagome could realize of how if Peachman was human or a cannibal or something, but Inuyasha could fight off against the Peachman, he would wants to know who is the Peachman's weakness. So Inuyasha has to fight off the battle against the Peach Man in order to get the shard as well, particularly of how he would have gotten the credibility to fight off against the Peach Man as well. However, particularly of how if it possesses the power at least to heal the wounds, and how everything all would have got to him as well. Scroll 6, the Enchanted Bow. When they figure out basically how they realized of how they were human heads, which always there, but Inuyasha wants to defeat the Peach Man with a weapon, basically, if he could figure out. So Moroku wanted to use the wind tunnel, which he is uncovered, but it's already have, and as well. But he wanted to know if Kagome could have used the arrow to fight off against the Peach Man, basically. So Kagome has finally got the arrow. Oh, if she but something snapped, which is almost the more vulnerable ways of how it's been. So instead, Inuyasha has to grab a thing that looked like a spiky thorn right into the Peach Man's eye as well. Especially his arm was broken, basically, when Inuyasha must have stopped him as well. If the real Hermit Master, the old one, told him that to avenge him and all those who are devoured, if Kagome could realize she could use the arrow, just became a bow, which is how it's this. The real Hermit Master was sacrificed himself when he became the bow of the arrow. Before the Peach Man almost could have tear Inuyasha apart, Kagome has to use the arrow to kill off against the Peach Man himself. So the Shikon shard comes out of the gut of the Peach Man's body, particularly of how. So that sets off the Peach Man, but when Inuyasha has to fight off the Peach Man in a chaotic battle, and the chaos goes particularly of how he could have fight off against the Peach Man. Scroll 7, the Soul of the Demon. When Inuyasha has tried to fight off against the Peach Man, basically, until Peach Man has fallen to the ground as well, until the Peach Man died as well. How they realized if they could have rescued Inuyasha, but he was heavy. So this was until the morning comes, and Inuyasha's in his half-demon form, basically, as well. She thought that Inuyasha was dead, but he was survived if he could have realized of any regrets. Because Inuyasha was still alive. Yeah. Because she thought Inuyasha has been dead, but Inuyasha has survived, particularly of how they would have known for this. Any regrets of how this would have gotten to, how there were the corpse what the Peach Man has devoured from the tree as well, particularly. Meanwhile, back in her home, the real present-day Japan, she could have gotten to the mood to study, to figure out of how it would have gotten to her as well. She thought if Inuyasha's there. Meanwhile, at night, Inuyasha has told that Moroku saying it's a world of enemies, of how, in the one moment of weakness as how. But Moroku told him that he has won against the Peach Man with a weak human body, particularly of how he supposed of how anything would have gotten to him, of how he wanted to become a good demon anyway, because he was there to protect Kagome, as how when the Shikon Jewel makes Inuyasha into a full demon, particularly of how would he, which is so true for him, which has a lot to do for this. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the forest, the Giant Centipede was coming to attack as well, and this young lady, the woman with a giant boomerang named Sango, used a giant boomerang-like weapon to fight off against a giant centipede to protect everyone in the village, particularly as well. Until then, of how she could figure out how she has the reward of how the Shikon Jewel came from her village. Scroll 8, the Exterminators. Inuyasha, Kagome are in the village, particularly if there was a woman who walked off with a Shikon shard, of how they knew that she has defeated the Giant Centipede, particularly of how when Moroku could figure out at peace of how there was and make matters worse, particularly of how there was the Exterminator's village, as how they could figure out to realize of how she said that came from her village from the very beginning, particularly of how the existence of how what the Shikon Jewel shard came from, basically, until Sango returned home to her village, particularly of how they knew that she defeated the Giant Centipede with that boomerang-like weapon, until Kilala appeared as well, until Sango's brother came, that she has found the Shikon shard as well, particularly in the village, particularly of how to pacify the evil with the power of the shard, as how this seems. Ever since the jewel's possession, of how every person has died in the battle over the shard as well, until it possesses the power when the jewel appears. When she has a job to fight off the demons, to like fight off, which is her serious business as well. Her brother named Kohaku is basically 11 years old, who needs to be experienced in a real battle, particularly. Meanwhile, at this time, of course, Kohaku and Sango could figure out how they were going to fight off these demons, basically. But Sango told Kohaku that the demons are only spiders and giant snakes as well. Well, her father is fond of saying that there's fearsome demons, ones that wear the form of the human, especially the ones that wanted to get their hands on the Sheik shard as well. By this time, of course, when the night about the giant spider assaulted the castle, when everyone could figure how there's some trust for most in the village, of how Kohaku and Sango could figure out about how those who basically of how he starts to fight off but her father wants to fight off the giant spider-like demon until it came from above, from the sky. Yeah, there's Sango in the chapter as well. Yeah. The first appearance in this chapter of Sango, as how it goes, particularly of how the spider's evil Aurora would have gotten to this, particularly of how the rapid recovery of how the hellish nightmare would have got to this. When Sango wants to fight off against the giant demon monster as well, but something basically of how the forge forward towards between her father and her brother Kohaku as well, to fight off if they got the chance to defeat the spider demon monster, particularly of how the succeeded goes, of how the Deathstroke appears, until some little looking spider has gone onto Kohaku's neck in the substance. Something got to him until it kills off the other ones. And she realized something must have bit Kohaku, particularly during the battle. Scroll 9, the ambush. When something has made Kohaku changed, of something might have controlled him in his mind, particularly, of how instead Kohaku starts to fight off against Sango, but she could realize, if she told Kohaku that can he just recognize Sango as well, of how the exterminators could fight off against those monsters as well, particularly in the battle between Kohaku and her sister Sango in this chapter, like there as well. And the scene is that basically of how there was the silk of the spider, basically, of how she realized it was him who might have caught something happened to what has done to Kohaku, until they thought she's gone crazy and they had to stop to this, until the scar on their back, the bladed weapon caught her on the back as well. But something happened when Kohaku, who has been recovered, particularly something what happened to Sango, until the arrows has gotten to a shot at Kohaku as well. When Sango realized that Kohaku was frightened and scared as well, until the arrows might have gotten her, until it wasn't basically long until the arrival of this opponent. This person came from above as well, of how this might have been that demon himself, Naraku, as well, of how he might have been possessed for this of all some sorts. The evening comes. Inuyasha, Kagome, Moroku, and Shippo are on the search of how there's something happening in the exterminator's village, particularly of how they could realize something from above, until they sworn of all these demons coming from the sky. There was a pack of demons coming as well. So Inuyasha had to fight off against those as well, until basically Sango comes out, she could swore against as well, particularly of how she's the exterminator as well. Scroll 10, Within the Fort. When Inuyasha, Kagome Shippo, and Roku realized of how there was those demons target in this exterminator's village, with the sense of blood everywhere and the bloody hellish chaos, as how these demon exterminators, they were seeking, particularly of how it's moving, and Kilala is has always there, because they were not enemies until, yeah, that's the first appearance of Kilala as well, particularly of how it has seemed anything to do for this as well. That's how they wanted to realize if Sango was alright. By this time, of course, this person who has wanted to know if Sango has been recovered as well, is how it was Naraku. The young prince said, is it Naraku or something? When he realized some, especially something happening to the fort as well, which didn't seem so well. There was like the villagers have been defeated, particularly of how they realized of how there's many things that has happened from above, about how the bloody oil strewn of the corpse of the villagers, particularly of how what Naraku and his apprentice would have a lot to do. When Sango wants to get her weapons back, including her boomerang, when she was a vow to revenge to fight Inuyasha. So that's the story of how thus far how it happens in the chapter. Though, I mean, in my opinion, this is basically how my thoughts on this. This volume basically how it gets the first appearance of Sango and her brother Kohaku that are now introduced, of how this goes on in the volume of the Inuyasha manga, of how, particularly of how this goes on, particularly. The story is very good. The chapters are very new, and wasn't that picky to know for this as well. And my score for this manga, overall, for my thoughts on this one, if you want to binge read on this, you have to read this in order to, like, read every volumes of the Inuyasha as well. My score for this manga, a 10 out of 10 as well. And it's also part of the recommendations also, in your manga recommendations also as well. So that's going to be it for my manga review on Inuyasha Volume 9 for the first time on my manga review for today. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's what I have to say for this one. Even though I've already covered 8 volumes of my Inuyasha manga on my previous manga reviews, this is the new one that I get to review. Hope subscribe for content. My anime plan, link in the description down below. You can share this video on your Twitter, Facebook, if you have Twitter and Facebook account, and all the social media. Smack the like button if you enjoy this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below in this video, if you like as well. What's your thoughts on the 9th volume of the Inuyasha manga, because this is the first appearance of the characters Sango and her brother Kohaku in the volume of the Inuyasha manga. If you want to check out my anime planet, the link will be in the description down below, because I have a huge backlog of anime and manga as well on my Anime Planet account as well. The Patreon link will be in the description also as well. Be sure to click on the subscribe button. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, RuRoniK95. Feel free to join my channel, especially if you're new to my channel as a newcomer. Smack the notifications bell button. Be sure to get notified also as for more latest updates. Keep it otaku for this manga review on Inuyasha Volume 9. I guess I have reviewed 9 volumes as well. I will be reviewing more volumes as soon as I can when I get some more manga volumes of the Inuyasha manga as well. This is RuRoniK95 saying thank you for watching my video. I'm glad you liked it. Hope you enjoy it. Hope to see you soon for the next video. Hope you have a great day. I appreciate you for listening to my review on my manga review on the Inuyasha Volume 9 manga. This is RuRoniK95 signing off, and thank you for watching my video, and I will see you soon for more videos. Take care.